We are live. Welcome to another edition of what is cross-streaming as the Geeks and Games podcast. My name is Paul Boudreau. I am wearing my attorney suit today. I had a hearing this morning. But I wanted to finally produce some content now that my life has given me a few minutes to stop and think. I've been asked recently in the last couple of weeks by many of my students and other coaches and stuff about what I think about the discussions, the broader discussions for Jiu Jitsu, and specifically the things that John Danaher has been commenting on. I finally got around to watching the Joe Rogan Experience with John Danaher. I've watched many interviews with him, and I've also watched the Lex Fridman podcast, which is that puts nearly 7 hours worth of content. I listened to the Gordon Ryan interview. I listened to the Craig Jones and Volkanovski interview. And so I've been looking at a lot of professionals, and obviously they have the best system in the world as far as a team goes. I don't think in no-gi grappling it can be disputed that there's anyone else you would probably look to for inspiration, at least as the sport stands today. So there are a lot of topics that come up in these discussions, but there are some general themes. Number one is training styles and frequency in training. Number two has to do with overall philosophy. And the third, I think, big takeaway is innovation. Like, what do you have to do to be the best in the world? So in preparing for the ADCC North American trials this year, something I've been trying to do for the last several years, I've been looking at systems, I've been upping my training, and I've been looking to try and see, are there any commonalities between the best in the world when it comes to performance training, whether it be physio, diet, exercise, training, what is the most beneficial and what are the common denominators when it comes to the people who have the highest performance? I listened to the Dan Gable interview. I recently watched the masterclass for Wayne Gretzky, which I thought was really interesting, which doesn't relate to grappling, but it is someone who is at the top of their field from the time that they were nearly 17 until the age of 39 for Wayne Gretzky. And there are a few things that are not helpful to me personally, but may be helpful to a younger generation. I didn't start my martial arts career until well into my 20s. I don't have a large background when it comes to martial arts or even athletics in general. It's not some progeny that I have that I come from a long line of athletes. That's certainly not the case. And I think that's why Jiu-Jitsu is so profound. And why it interests me so much is because you can really spend the time and dedication on technique and start closing that gap. I aspire to be the very best grappler I can possibly be. It would be wonderful if that makes me the best grappler in the world. But every day, I think you just have to work on being 1% better than the day before and hope that those compound into a form of very high success. So, when considering training regimens, frequency of training, styles in jiu-jitsu. One of the conversations that I had, that I was a part of many years ago when I got to train at a seminar with John Danaher. It was actually a John Danaher Ben Askren seminar in New York. I flew out to, and there they had a discussion that is in line with the discussions that were happening recently with John Danaher, which is, what makes the Danaher Death Squad different? What is it that leads to their success? And there are a myriad of answers you could give to this, but I think one of them is that they are not involved what John Danaher referred to as a club sport, because in the discussion that, and they've had several discussions since then, Askren and Danaher have had is, what is the difference between competition level wrestling and competition level jiu-jitsu? And my biggest observation is that, it's not institutionalized. The history of jiu-jitsu is not institutionalized from the time people are kids. It's starting to happen now. There are more jiu-jitsu clubs now than in the history of the world, but there historically have not been, in comparison, I had an old coach that I worked with who says, I wrestled for 22 years. My sport is as old as time. I think is exactly what he said. And that's partially true, and that's part of it. Part of it is it's ingrained in the American ethos, and it's within the fabrics of our school systems, particularly in college, right? Like in the United States right now, I know of no institution that you can go and be a part of a team and pay for your college, right? Like there's not a specific institution that allows that. And even many institutions after COVID and finance Stanford recently had their big controversy about cutting their wrestling program, and now it looks like they're going to restore it. And so I think that, that's one of the fundamental differences is the level of dedication and organization in the United States when it comes to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is exceedingly lacking in comparison to vis-a-vis the wrestling institutions. And that's just a matter of history. And so I think that's one thing that would have to change to really level up the game of international competition when it comes to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I think a second thing is, the implications of jiu-jitsu as far as, potential for injury and training leads to much of a club sport mentality when it comes to most gyms. So most gyms have to worry about their bottom line to even stay open, right? Like John Danaher, in one of the conversations that I recall him stating, he goes, one of the benefits that I have is I am in a basement with an entire group of sadomasochists, and we're focusing on one skill. They have a dedicated team. They have a specifically dedicated competition team. And now that they've moved to Puerto Rico, they have very tailored and oriented routines just for their goals. So, that they have their own specialization of labor when it comes to either gi or no gi. They've chosen to do it professionally as no-gi grapplers, so they've specialized there. They also have specialization when it comes to their training in that the individuals who are involved know the level of dedication, know the detail orientation of the training. And one thing about John Danaher is, he's articulated several times that, he works systems, but he doesn't have everybody constantly doing the exact same thing. He spends so much time with his grapplers that he'll look, they'll start out on systems and he'll look and watch them in the training room and say, just for instance, he'd say, Nicky Rod, you need to work on your bottom game, right? Just hypothetically, maybe he does, maybe he doesn't, but that's something that he might tell Nicky Rod that he wouldn't tell Gordon. And so that's what he says is, he looks, evaluates day to day because they train 7 days a week. And so he sees where people are deficient. And so he pushes them towards getting better where each individual person is deficient. And certainly he has the depth of knowledge to know and be able to immediately identify what people need to work on. It's one of the bigger challenges that I have as both a competitor and a coach. And why it's important to film yourself competing is that it's hard to see where your own deficiencies are. And so you always have to be your own biggest critic. Another part of the conversation, so the second part of a conversation that happens here is, what does it take to win, right? What does it take on like a Joe Rogan podcast? He is talking about, what could you do to be even better? Well, fundamentally, it's difficult to think how Gordon Ryan could be any better, but he talks about, ice baths and sauna and stretching and all these different things that I think are good, especially for older grapplers as we start to age and reach our prime, and then to try to stay in our prime as much as possible and then beyond. I think that there's, I often call them maintenance workouts. You need to do workouts, even if it's not directly oriented towards your specific training. It's just good to keep the body even. I think one of the things that I've dealt with as a competitor is you spend so much time on the mats and less time in the weight room, is you start to develop asymmetries in your body, in neck development and grip strength. And, if your hip gets hurt, you might start favoring one side. There's all different kinds of things that can cause misalignment and cause injuries. And so you have to do things that are oriented towards both general well-being, and then you have to have hyper-focused attention to detail workouts and plans for individualized training. And one of the things in the United States now is most of the gyms survive as club sports. You have hobbyists who come in, and my gym that I train at is largely the same. I don't own or operate the gym yet, and so it's not it's not that I have full discretion to do jiu-jitsu 24/7. We are a mixed martial arts gym. I cross train pretty much everything that I can, and we have a good solid system, but there's always room for improvement, right? Not all of us are as particularly blessed as the Danaher Death Squad, and it's through their own hard work, and it's their success begets success. And so they are able to focus even more to be even more successful because they have the tools and resources to move to Puerto Rico, open a big gym, and have people who fly from around the world to come in and train with them because of the high caliber of training that you get when you're there. So I think they have a unique self-fulfilling system. In business, we call it the first movers principle, that oftentimes, like Google, right? There used to be major competitors for Google as a search engine. Now, it's hard to even say that they have competitors, right? Like there are others that are out there, but I don't ever use Bing or Yahoo or anything else that you used to use as a search engine. I almost exclusively use Google for everything. And so, it's like the Danaher Death Squad itself has become its own monopoly power. And, the good things for the rest of our practitioners is that, John Danaher, even though they're so expensive, always puts out, he's constantly putting out brand new instructionals. So you can look and watch film 10, 12, 14 hours. I think his latest half guard instructional that I got was 14 hours worth of content just on the study of half guard. And, John Danaher, as with any good coach, not only pushes students to learn the system and implement the system, but it's not just mimesis. He's not just looking for people to mimic Gordon or to mimic, whoever the best grappler in the world may be. He's looking to expound upon and expand the depths of their own knowledge and to experiment, right? I have referred to jiu-jitsu as it's a constant everyday hypo-testing. We're hypothesis testing, your plan strategy versus my plan strategy. Is your Delakiva guard better than my passing? Is your bottom half guard better than my top half guard? These are real life tests that we're putting ourselves to in the sport of jiu-jitsu. And so I think that, there are a number of things that have to change in jiu-jitsu for there to be massive rivals against the Danaher Death Squad. There are really good institutions out there that put out, top athletes who are competitive. But when you look across the board, that they are the Oklahoma States, the Iowa States, they are, the 10-time NCAA championship equivalents when it comes to, the Abu Dhabi World Championships, when it comes to just overall record. And with, Gordon essentially being sidelined indefinitely, it'll be interesting to see how and where, the field opens up for newcomers. But the systems that are implemented is, even when you're studying them, you're often several years behind because before these instructionals put out, the Danaher Death Squad is largely masters of the system, and they're on to developing new systems by the time any instructional comes out. So there's a time lag between even the content that they put out and where their team is in actual competition. And so, as a competitor, you have to try to find ways to not only short circuit the things that they're doing, but to try to catch up and overcome or anticipate and come up with new and innovative ways. And, it's difficult to see from my perspective where that's going to come from. I hope that it happens. And, I am certainly obsessed with the study of jiu-jitsu and film and technique. But I think the common themes, both with all the Danaher coach, John, and the competitors is, they see the opportunity cost, right? They're not worried about focusing on just getting better stamina or just being strong, right? I mean, that is part of what they do, but their main focus is on implementing and drilling the technique, particularly dealing with finishes, right? That's one thing that we talked about at the seminar is, I think John was talking about an old, Russian wrestling coach who was, essentially the man of 1,000 finishes. He would show and have people drill 1,000 times to get the finish, right? To build their confidence that if they can get the finish, they're going to finish anyone in the world. And, students would come and say, well, why don't we ever work any entries? And he says, I think it was exactly this. He says, if you are confident that you can finish anyone in the world, you will fucking find a way to enter, right? Like that was the mentality that they had in their training. And so I know that's one of the things that has motivated him over the years is being extremely skilled in your finishing abilities. And so that's something that I try to work on and that I plan on working on even more over the coming next, 4 or 5 months. I have added, 3 additional training times to my schedule. I hopefully am going to be taking the proceeds from some business ventures that I've been doing and having that supplement my ability to train even more. I'm thinking about, what the greats do differently, the Kobe Bryants, the Dan Gables, what is it that they're doing? And a lot of it has to do with the will to win. You have to have the will to win. And in that mentality, that will to win is demonstrated not on the competition field, but in the training room. The will to win means the will to practice, the will to come in and put in the effort and the time and the hours. And it's funny, I've had a minor review of just watching old anime, and specifically I've been watching, it's always, I think everyone, at least most of the men in Jiu Jitsu who are my age are, like Dragon Ball Z fans. And I was recently rewatching Dragon Ball Super. And, I was just thinking about one of the main criticisms is always, it's an internet meme that, Goku's a bad father. And in Dragon Ball Super, they talk about how, Goku has to fight Lord Beerus and even his kids, Gohan and Goten, who have been largely neglected much of their life due to their dad's training, are like, dad needs to go, right? They understand the importance of the mission and why even it is selfish. I think that's one thing that I've learned. It's difficult as a martial artist who's truly dedicated to trying to be the very best that they can be, is you have to be quite selfish, right? You have to, and it's not a matter of conceit in that you're being selfish in a negative way. It's not, being selfish seems like a bad negative connotation. And so, but maybe kind of like the Randian idea of selfishness is that you have to invest all of your time and effort in, right? It's like, what'd you do this weekend? Well, I trained. What'd you do last weekend? Well, I trained. It's a holiday, Memorial Day. What'd you do? I trained. Or I did active recovery. Or, I did something that supplemented my training, or I watched 10 hours of videos, or, whatever it is. I think that is one of the unspoken things about it is, Gordon Ryan, he spent years where he's like quite literally living on the mats. He's going to the mats in the morning and training and taking a nap on the mats and then training again, right? And then, after 15 days, maybe going home. And it's hard. It's really hard to explain to people who don't live the lifestyle, and even those who do, right? It's just like there are just levels of commitment that not everyone in a club sport can achieve. And so I think that's a struggle for us, the smaller schools and affiliates, is getting people who can have that kind of, and I never want to or try to hold it against people who can't make practices, right? Like, I completely understand that people have professional careers, lives, families. They've made specific life choices and life choices that they can't emulate for me because of where they're at in their lives, right? I've made very specific decisions in my training, in my work life, and my living situations to help supplement and fulfill the desire to be as good as possible at jiu-jitsu. And I think that is something that people, I have over the years have met a lot of people who express verbally their desire to be good, to be a champion, to be the best. And I have encountered very, very few, not none, but very few who walk the walk, right? Everyone, it's like they say, everyone can talk the talk, but there are an elite few who walk the walk day in and day out, because it is a grind. It's lonely. There's no money in it. You're not doing it. There are like 5 people who have made really good money doing strictly jiu-jitsu, and pretty much all of them are on the Danaher Death Squad, right? Like there's just, or have trained with the Danaher Death Squad. Like there's just not significant sums of money to be made. I hope that changes. But if the history of amateur sports tells me anything, I'm reluctant to think that there's a ton of money to be made in the immediate future. But one of my life goals is to help inspire people who lead normal lives to see that this is an avenue that is worth pursuing. That the pain and the suffering and the anguish that you go through times is really worth it, and that you can accomplish a lot of things that you really never would have believed. Like if you told me 6 years ago that I would be dedicating 40 plus hours to doing something that I had never even heard of when I was a teenager, like I kind of knew what the UFC was on like Spike TV. But I knew Joe Rogan from News Radio and Fear Factor. Had no idea he was a commentator for the UFC until years later. I watched Bruce Lee movies as a kid and thought, saw the phenomenal things that he did and was like, well, they've been doing that since they were children. No way I can ever compete. And it was the wrong mentality. It's not a winner's mentality, because a winner's mentality is not, inherently I'm the best. You do want to think that you are the best and can be the best, but it's about, I think I was at a seminar with Craig Jones, and he goes, I try not to have idols, with his accent. I try not to have idols. And because you have to, at some point, if you're going to be the best in the world, or if you're Greg Jones, if you're going to be the second best in the world, you can poison Gordon Ryan to become first. But if you want to be in the upper echelons of competitors, you have to look at any, the old adage of, grind until your idols become your rivals. But it's just don't have idols, right? Have people that you respect and that, that you have an affinity for or a love for. But it's not just about, you don't want to put anyone into some sort of meteoric status where it's like, oh man, I can never do that. It's just, how do I do that? Or how do I do it differently that's better? That has to be the mentality. It has to be a problem-solving mentality with every moment of training, which is not, oh my God, I wish I could be that good. It's what is it going to take for me to do the things that make me able to beat someone that good? That has to be the crux of your training if you want to compete at an elite level. And if not, that's great too. That's the other aspect of jiu-jitsu, is jiu-jitsu has, and martial arts in general have, skills and benefits for everyone. Anyone who's physically active and mobile can get something out of jiu-jitsu, can get something out of, martial arts, self-protection, a good workout, a sense of community and belonging. Especially after COVID, I think everyone is extremely hungry and desiring, just more human-to-human contact. I know I certainly have. That's been one of the most difficult parts. And I haven't been to an in-person hearing in almost a year and a half. Almost everything is digital. And so when you don't have, when you're in your own small business and you don't have coworkers, it's very isolating. And so I know a lot of people have that desire to be a part of community and fellowship. And I think that's something that, wrestling and jiu-jitsu and martial arts in general give to people. And I think that's going to be more important now than ever. And so, the ideas of, what it takes for jiu-jitsu to grow is, I think we have to expand the definition of what jiu-jitsu is and what grappling is. I think we have to see that, grappling as its own umbrella, but judo, wrestling, jiu-jitsu are complementary, and really they're the same sport guided by the underlying rule sets. I mean, that's just it. Is, wrestling and jiu-jitsu and judo are just motivated by what the rules allow and what the rules reward. And so, every time I teach the same thing every time new wrestlers come in. New wrestlers who do jiu-jitsu specifically are going to have two main problems. Number one, they're going to get guillotined a lot. They're going to put their head outside, and the person with a really good guillotine is going to snatch it up right away. Number two, they're going to give up their back a lot, right? In wrestling, the checkmate is getting your back pinned. And so it's like death before being pinned. And in jiu-jitsu, people freely go to their back and guard, right? Like it's one of our main starting positions. And so, you have bad habits for the sport at hand, but you know how to move your body like a grappler if you've wrestled, and vice versa. Like how to do many of the things that wrestlers do if you've done jiu-jitsu. And so I think that as the UFC and ONE FC and any other organizations that come along, expand and grow, you'll see that the lines of sambo, judo, jiu-jitsu, wrestling are going to blur more and more together, and that you're going to have to teach. I teach wrestling for jiu-jitsu, wrestling for MMA. And one of the observations that John Danaher says is, there's an underlying essential agreement in jiu-jitsu that someone's going to play top and someone's going to play bottom for the course of the match. But in MMA, that's not the case. People are going to be springing up. And so we, as practitioners, are going to be looking to evolve with the world of martial arts around us and orient our training in that direction. So I think there are a lot of things that Danaher and his squad are talking about that the rest of the grappling community should reflect upon and examine and try to incorporate the things that they find helpful. I try to find motivation from anywhere that I can get it. Old wrestling videos, any instructional that I think will be helpful, any small details that I think will add to my game. I'm just on a mission to explore and try and be the ultimate version of myself. And I encourage my students and anyone else who watches this to do the same thing. It's all I can say is if you're thinking about doing jiu-jitsu, you should do jiu-jitsu. It's never too late. There's beginner courses. You come just for, I have students who are in their 40s, 50s, who, have injuries and bad backs. And so it's just about determining your level of commitment and what you want to get out of it, and having that conversation with your club or your professor or wherever you're going in order to have a reasonable expectation of what you're going to do and what you're going to get out of it. And so, with the new aged philosophy of jiu-jitsu, I think that we are in a state of flux, and I think it's going to be that way for a while. And I think that's good. I think it's good to expand our thoughts and definitions of what is good for the community and what's good for our training, and also seeking an elite level with those who have the same level of dedication, and not being upset that not everyone can be there, right? It's not for the faint of heart if you want to really try to sell out and be the best in the world. And, even with the level that I train, I'm still, I'm still no one in the world of grappling. And, my ultimate goal is to compete at ADCC. Because if you told me as a kid that I could have even done a trial and felt comfortable doing a trial of something that would be known as, essentially Olympic level athleticism, I would never have believed it. It's still, I've been training for many years now, dedicated to trying to do this tournament, and it's failed for several reasons to not get to compete. And I want to do more than compete. I want to win, and I want to go and I want to compete at higher level tournaments for exposure afterwards. But it would be great just to be part of the conversation, and I think that is a formidable goal for all of the practitioners out there. We want to be part of the conversation, and even that is crowding out. And so you have to be exceptional, and you have to be, an uncommon man amongst uncommon people, as David Goggins would say. And so in searching that, just know that you might find times that you want to quit and that it's, lonely or doesn't seem like you're getting quite the ROI that you want. But, at the end of the day, I always come out on the other side of training happier, better for it. And so I encourage all of my students and anyone who ever listens to this podcast or watches any of my videos to do the same. I hope that the content that I put out helps motivate people, encourage people, and can help them learn jiu-jitsu at a low cost if they have problems, seeking out training elsewhere. And so this has just been some of my thoughts on all of the content I've been absorbing from the Danaher Death Squad. I really respect and admire their squad, and particularly John. Working with him was great, even for the short amount of time. I hope to do it again. I would like to go and train in Puerto Rico. I'm definitely going to do that at some point when they fully open their gym. And, if all things work out. And so hopefully that happens within the next year or so. And so I'll keep you guys appraised of how that goes. I'm sure I'll have lots of video and content that I'll put out from that. So as always, thanks for tuning in to the Geeks and Beans podcast. If you'd like to find my link tree, just go to Drojitsu, DREAUXGITSU. You can find all of my information, all of my social media is there. So thanks for tuning in.